Welcome to the Gentleman Project Podcast. I'm Cory Moore.
And I'm Kirk Chugg. Today, we are in a special place. We're at Mac's Place in Salt Lake City. Cory's office was under construction today, a little bit noisy to do a podcast. So Brady here at Mac's Place in Salt Lake City, which is a super cool place, private club, barbershop, get your massage, you can have a drink, you can get your hair cut, and have a private function here. They opened their doors to us, short notice. We came over here, and we're here today with a friend of mine, Randy Sutton. Randy and I met about 6 years ago down in Las Vegas. We recently ran into each other again a couple of weeks ago down in Vegas. And I asked him to be on the podcast because Randy has always impressed me as somebody who is interested in leaving a legacy. And Randy has a bio like as long as my arm about movies that he's been in, books that he's written, foundations that he started, and we're going to get into all of that today. But thank you for joining us today, Randy, here in Salt Lake.
It is my pleasure, and I'm going to give you my radio voice just for a moment.
I asked him to do this. I was like, please do the radio voice intro. Okay, ready.
Hello, this is Randy Sutton, the voice for American law enforcement, and I'm happy to be here.
That was good.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you.
I'm going to practice so that, at some point in my life, I can have that kind of radio voice. Right?
So
you're pretty close right now, I got to tell you.
So Randy is a sought after guest on a lot of news organizations, on stages all over the country, for his work with law enforcement and assistance for those who have been wounded in the line of duty. And we're going to let him talk a little bit about what his foundation does and the legacy that it has created. But first, Randy, tell us a little bit about Randy the Man.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to really thank you guys for inviting me up here. It's a pleasure to be here. I love the idea of your podcast, and to be able to reach your audience really is an honor for me. So thanks for having me. And it's worth the drive from Vegas.
And he did. He drove from Vegas. He was here anyway, and we snagged him while he was here. So
yeah, it's awesome. So let me give you a little bit of background for those who are in the listening audience. I spent 34 years as a police officer. I started my career in a small community in New Jersey called Princeton, where the university is. And I believe that I was the youngest police officer in the state of New Jersey at the time. I was 19. Now imagine they had just changed the age of majority from 21 to 18. So you could drink and you could vote and you could become a cop. But one thing you couldn't do was buy ammunition. You had to be 21. So I'm getting ready to go into the New Jersey State Police Academy, and I had to have my mom go buy my bullets for me. And it was something that she laughed about till the day she died.
That is crazy.
And I spent 10 years there. I was a patrol officer for 6, detective for 4. And then, quite honestly, I got bored because it was small town, 30 police officers, and I just needed more action.
You got to go to Vegas.
So where did I go? I went to Vegas, and the old adage, be careful what you wish for.
A lot more action there.
And it was a completely different environment to be a police officer. We went in Princeton. We called ourselves grin and wave cops. Hi, Mrs. Jones. We would wave to them. And in Vegas, you are in the mix all the time. Dangerous place. In fact, I was in my first shooting before I was off probation. So that gives you a little flavor of what the environment is in Vegas. And I spent 24 years there, retired as a lieutenant, street lieutenant. And it was, I never looked back at making that move. It created opportunities for me that I never would have had anywhere else, including being on the TV show Cops a bunch of times. Wound up getting picked up for some pretty significant movie roles.
Yeah, you're in some big movies. Tell them which movies you're in, because that's pretty cool, actually.
So I was, like I said, I was on the TV show Cops, and from that, one day I get a phone call from a casting director, and this casting director says, there's going to be a movie filmed in Las Vegas, and the director wants realism in the part of a police officer. Would you come down and do an audition? And I'm always looking for an adventure, so sure. I said, yeah. So I go to the hotel. It was on the Strip, and I walk into this suite, and who's standing there but Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese, and it's the film Casino. And my audition consisted of me telling them war stories about being a Vegas cop. And I told them some pretty funny stories, I gotta say. And they started laughing and said, you got the role, man. You got the role.
That's awesome.
And that's how I got into the Screen Actors Guild and have been acting and doing TV and movies ever since.
That's a heck of a movie to start on, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, it was.
Big time people there.
And wow, in fact, this is kind of crazy, but Robert De Niro and I ad-libbed the entire scene. Those were not the lines that were.
So I'm going back to watch that now. You know I have to do
You got to, of course.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what happened to you at the end of your career in Vegas and why you're doing what you're doing now. And then I want to talk about what it is you're doing now, because it's amazing.
The reason I retired was not because I had wanted to. Even though I did spend 34 years as a cop, I only had 24 years with the Metro, and I was planning on doing 30 years. But life stepped in and created a different path for me than I had anticipated. Now, I should tell you that there was a lot of things happening in my life at this time, and my mother had died in my arms 3 weeks before. 2 months before that, I'd been involved in a fatal shooting, and so there was a lot of stuff going on in my life. But I was on patrol. It's 2:30 in the morning. I spent my entire lieutenant's career as a graveyard lieutenant, because in Vegas that's where the action is. And I had this young officer with me. Whenever I was the watch commander, which meant I was the highest ranking officer on the department who was on duty, I would take a patrol officer with me because I could get to know my people. And I had this young man with me. It was the first time he'd ever ridden with me. And we're on Las Vegas Boulevard, right in front of Bally's Hotel. And I had a stroke. And I knew I was having a stroke because I was talking to him just like I'm talking to you guys. And suddenly I found myself talking slower and slower. And I knew right away that I was having a stroke. So I stopped the car and I told him, I said, get me medical. I'm having a stroke. And he looked at me and he was wondering, is this the way the lieutenant screws with me? Right, yeah. Because it wouldn't be, I mean, we do mess with each other, right?
Sure.
So, but then he realized that this was the real deal. And I got out of the car to go around to the passenger side in case he needed to get me to the hospital. And I started speaking gibberish. And I knew I was speaking gibberish. You have no control of what you're saying or doing.
Yeah, that's scary.
It was the most frightening moment of my life. And then I lost the ability to speak altogether, crumpled to the pavement, and lay there in a dirty gutter. And that's where my career ended, was on a dirty Las Vegas street. And as I'm laying there, tourists are walking by me, taking my picture.
You're kidding me.
No. And I'm literally helpless. And this poor officer is trying to protect me. And he had already called for officer needs help. So I hear the sirens in the background. And pretty soon they all surrounded me to protect me from, that humiliation. And luckily the angel that's been on my shoulder my entire career was with me again that night. And the blood clot that caused the stroke went through my brain. Didn't cause any real major physical damage. I lost some memory and it had some effect on me, but certainly nothing, that what could have happened. So, but it did end my career. And then something happened that I never expected. And that was that when my own department turned its back on me and refused to pay my medical bills. And they knew they were legally obligated to do it. It's an on-duty injury. They just said, no, we're not doing it. And it was shocking to me. Here's a department that I literally almost gave my life for on more than one occasion. And they just turned their back on me. And I even went to see the sheriff, a guy who I'd worked with for 24 years. And I said, how do you treat me like this? And he looked at me dead in the eye and said, Randy, this isn't personal. It's just business. And so I had a taste of something that, embittered me. I felt like, here I gave so much of myself, and this is the way that they treated me. But I thought I was the Lone Ranger here, right? And I thought that it was just me.
Yeah.
Well, so what happened as a result of this, and this is where, we talk about legacy and pathways that, you think, I thought this was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. All the loss that I'd had, my mom dying and then losing my career, losing my identity, if you will, because, that was me. I was a cop. And now I'm not. And now, what am I? Who am I?
Yeah.
And all this was playing out with me, and trying to figure out the next direction of my life. And because of my notoriety within the law enforcement community, because of being in the movies, being on TV show Cops, writing books, I was a trainer for law enforcement officers all over the country. So I trained tens of thousands of police officers. Because of that visibility, police officers from around the nation started reaching out to me. Not because I could do anything about their issues, but because they just recognized my name. And this is what's so poignant. They were reaching out to me because of things that had happened to them where, for instance, an officer contacted me, Randy, I was shot in the line of duty. My chief never even came to visit me in the hospital. They're not paying my medical bills. I'm going to lose my house. Randy, I was hit by a car. They're not paying my medical bills. They've forgotten me. It's like I never existed. And not one or two, but 10 and then 20 and then 30, only because they knew who I was. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, hold on a second. There's got to be a resource for these men and women, because every single one of them at the end of this conversation or the message said virtually the same thing. I feel forgotten. I feel alone. I feel abandoned. And law enforcement already has an insane rate of suicide. All right. You add in the factor that you get injured and you become abandoned, and it becomes an epidemic. And I thought, okay, there's got to be a resource for these people, and discovered to my, my surprise, my shock, that there was no national resource. There's national resources if you get killed in the line of duty for your families, but there's none if you get injured. And so I realized that that's the pathway that I was meant to do, and created an organization called the Wounded Blue. And we are the national assistance and support organization for injured and disabled law enforcement officers. And your listeners can't see, but I have a T-shirt on from the Wounded Blue, and it says, "Never forgotten, never alone." And that is what our motto is. And that's what we live by, that motto.
It's a really cool T-shirt, by the way. I'm going to figure out how to get one of those.
Okay, I can tell you right now. You go to thewoundedblue.org and then go to shop.
Perfect. Perfect. I'm going to do that. Really good stuff. This is really important work that you're doing here. So tell us, what has happened since you started the charity?
It has been the adventure of a lifetime. I have met some of the most incredible people that walk this earth, both the heroes that have been injured, the heroes that help. See, here's what we do. I guess I should really mention this. We provide peer support for injured and disabled officers and become problem solvers for them. And so I have a team of some of the most incredible people you could ever meet. Every one of the members, we call them the peer advocate support team. Every one of these men and women has served or is still serving, even though many have been catastrophically injured in the line of duty. Everybody has been shot or stabbed or beaten or run over or has faced serious post-traumatic stress injury, and every one of them wants to continue to serve. And they do, and they have saved lives. We went operational a little over 2.5 years ago, and we've helped more than 13,000 police officers.
Jeez.
Which is the scope of the problem is illustrated by that number. And believe it or not, many police officers don't even know we exist yet, because we are a very new charity and a very new organization. So that's one of the things that I do is any forum that I can. There may be a police officer right now that's listening to this podcast and is saying, I need to reach out to them. And so every time I get the opportunity to talk to either the police or the public and tell them that this plight exists, then I jump on it. And because the reality is, I didn't believe that this problem existed. And I was a cop for 34 years. I just assumed if I get hurt in the line of duty, my department's going to take care of me. The city's going to take care of me. I'm going to at least get my medical care taken care of, and I'm going to get enough to live on and feed my family. And that's not the reality. It is in certain places.
I was going to ask you that. Are there some places that are better than others?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. If you're in New York City and you get disabled in line of duty, you're going to be taken care of medically, you're going to be taken care of with a pension, and you're going to be able to live a life. Then there's other places that also have enacted very strong workers' compensation laws, and the unions are strong, and they do take care of their people. But it's certainly not universal. I mean, we have a tremendous documentary film. It's on Amazon.com called The Wounded Blue: Service, Sacrifice, Betrayed. If anybody wants to see the reality, you got to check out this documentary. And also on YouTube, the Wounded Blue TV has a 6-part series called Voices of the Blue, and it'll shock you. Bring your tissues.
And if people want to reach out to you, whether they be a police officer listening to this or a family member, they go to woundedblue.com.
TheWoundedBlue.org.
TheWoundedBlue.org.
TheWoundedBlue.org. But I'm gonna tell you this. My email is randy@thewoundedblue.org. And if you're a police officer or your family member, we get a lot of family members who contact us and say, "Look, I know my husband's struggling or my friend is struggling. Can you reach out to them?" And we're really, really good at doing that. We are completely confidential. See, here's one of the harsh realities. Police officers are scared to death to ask for help, even though they know they need it, right? Why? Because they do not trust their own agencies' administrations. And I get in this, I'm not on a lot of Christmas cards lists for chiefs of police, I can tell you that, because many don't like the criticism that I have to be truthful about, and that is that officers do, even the departments that try to do it right. See, in many states right now, I can walk Cory, into your office, and you're the chief of police, and I said, "Chief, I've been struggling with this problem. I was in that shooting. I really think I need to see somebody." And you, as the chief, can say, "Randy, I'm really sorry to hear about that. Leave your gun and badge on the table here. Thanks for your service." And you can be fired. This is happening across America. Nobody knows it. So we have to fight. So the mission of the Wounded Blue is to improve the lives of injured and disabled officers through support, education, assistance, and legislation. And this is the way we are trying to change the environment. So what we do is so vital because we provide not only peer support, but we help people get into treatment, whether that treatment is for alcohol abuse, addiction issues, which often come with post-traumatic stress injury. So we are completely separate from any police agency. And that's what makes cops trust us. And that's why people come to us, because they know that the department isn't going to be notified about anything. And then one of the things that I'm really, really proud of is we have created a program called Code 4 Total Wellness. In police parlance, Code 4 means okay. I'm okay. Code 4 Total Wellness is something that we give. We pay for it as an organization for injured officers who are in need. They get 24-hour-a-day telemedicine with licensed MDs. They get discounts on prescriptions, on medical imaging, all kinds of medical stuff. Most important, CAPER, the Confidential Assistance Program for Emergency Responders. We pay for unlimited visits to psychologists for them and their family. And this is absolutely unheard of. This is something that we have been trying to get police agencies to come on board and give this to their cops. And a couple of them have come through, but most of them, they won't even talk to us.
What a work you're doing, oh my word. Like this problem, and in today's environment where it seems like the cops are getting it from every direction, right? And it's hard to be a cop today.
You know what? I don't think I could do it today, because I come from a time when if someone put their hands on you as a police officer, you knew they were going to jail. They knew they were going to jail, and they were probably going to get a little whooping at the same time, right? Now, if a police officer puts his hands on somebody, there are prosecutors that will absolutely go after the police officers for just defending themselves. I spent a lot of time up in Portland, and I actually went undercover during some of the riots there. And the reason I did that was so that I could be prepared to help those cops by seeing firsthand what they were experiencing. I've never seen anything like it. The city demanded that the police officers literally stand there and just take rocks and bottles without doing anything to help, without doing anything to defend themselves. I've never seen anything like it. It was like a war zone. And this is what we're seeing across the country. Demands that police literally don't even defend themselves. And as a result, what's happened is cops are scared to use the appropriate amount of force, and it's killing cops. This is one of the things that just offends me deeply, is that they hesitate now to shoot somebody that needs shooting. Really, let's be blunt. Somebody's going to try and stab me. I'm going to shoot them before they can stab me. There have been literally 20, 30, 40 times where I've seen videos where the officer is scared to death to use his weapon while he's being stabbed because they're afraid of being prosecuted. And this is something that we have to fight. This is something that actually, this is what my new book is going to be all about. The one I'm in the process of writing right now is we have forgotten the true victims of the defund the police movement. Not only are they the cops, but they are the very people who these political leftists claim to be the champion of, the underserved communities in some of the major cities. They're the forgotten victims. Now there is a movement that is, we celebrate criminality and we forget the victims. And that's something we can never do as a nation. You know, we talk about right and wrong. I mean, your podcast is about gentlemen. And that means honor. That means integrity. That means standing up for your beliefs. Mm-hmm. And what we have seen is a deterioration across the nation in these just core values. These are the values that we need to bring back. And that's the fight.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your book, The Power of Legacy. First time I met you, that's what drew me to you, was because you were talking about what you leave behind is the most important. And what will you be known for your time on earth? And you wrote a book, and I kind of want you to talk about how that book came to be, mm-hmm. the inspirations and the people and the mentors behind that book, and what that's done for you in your life by writing down and thinking about what you want your legacy to be. Because we want everybody listening to think, what are they going to write in my obituary? Yeah. What will my kids talk to their kids about when I'm gone? What did I stand for? What did I stand up for? And you've obviously created a legacy for yourself in standing up for those who need standing up for, which I tell my kids all the time. That's one of the hallmark qualities of a gentleman, is you stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves.
Absolutely.
So that's why you're on the podcast, is because you've created this legacy. So tell us about The Power of Legacy, the book, how it came to be, and the people and events behind it.
Sure. I believe in a certain life's philosophy, and that is that you cannot choose your destiny, but you can create your legacy. And if you conceive of that, that's a statement that means a lot. And creating a legacy is something that we all have control of. You touch one life in a positive way, you have changed the world and you have left a legacy. So when we think about ourselves and we think about our lives, how can we have a greater impact? So I've had some life-changing experiences. These life-changing experiences lead us to who we are and who we become. I have to go back in time a little bit because it's germane to this question. One of my most life-changing experiences was a gunfight that I survived that I really had no right to survive. It was a school shooter. The guy was shooting the kids at a high school dance, and he was crazed, and our paths met, and we were literally standing almost face to face, our gun muzzles touching when we both fired at exactly the same time.
Oh my goodness! And
I fired 2 rounds, and my gun jammed, and I was not wearing my ballistic vest. And he and I, literally, closer than you and I are right now, across the table from each other, if you can visualize that, if you're listening. And I had nowhere to go because I'm in a parking lot. And he's just continuing to shoot. And I'm thinking, this is the end for me. What is it going to feel like when that bullet enters my body, you know? And I wound up surviving it. And he didn't. And it was a life-changing moment for me because that led to my journey. And that's the journey of why. Like, why didn't I die? And why did he, when it could have and should have been the other way around? And that began my personal journey on trying to discover why I had survived. And I thought, you know what? This is a question that still, you know, is very much on my mind today. And I believe that I found the answer to that. And that was, I hadn't died that night because I had not fulfilled whatever my mission is. And, you know, depending on what, you know, your religious beliefs are, your spiritual beliefs, I'm a deep believer in a higher power. And I believe that I was chosen to stay here because I hadn't completed that mission. So then, what's the next question, right? All right, Randy.
What are you going to do?
What's your mission? And I believe that I came up with that too. And that was that I would touch the lives and improve the lives of the people that I respect the most in this society, and that's the American law enforcement officer. And so I've worked my entire life since then, either being an instructor or being a mentor or being as a spokesperson for, or touching the lives in some way of those police officers. And this mission that I'm on now is an extension of that. So then we go to the end of my career. I have the stroke. My mother passed away. And I am left to try and figure out what's my life going to be. And I had already written 3 books, all cop books, though. Mm-hmm. My first was called True Blue, Police Stories by Those Who Have Lived Them. I didn't intend to become a writer. In the life-changing moments, that one of which I just told you about, I had another. And that was quite the opposite of taking a life. It was giving a life. And I was placed in a position to save the life of a 1-month-old baby who had been shot in the face in a drive-by shooting. And it was one of the most incredible moments of my life. Not only did I save her life, but because I had been on the scene so quickly after the shooting, and I was able to clear her airway and give her mouth-to-mouth and bring her back from the death, she was unharmed in her brain. Because very often, you know, somebody doesn't get enough oxygen, quickly they become brain dead or, you know, limited brain function. In this case, she came back and she is now a beautiful, healthy woman. That story was so impactful to me that night I went home, broke out a bottle of scotch, and wrote the story. Took my old pen out, my yellow pad, wrote that story. I didn't have anything to do with it. I just needed to write it. Well, that was 1998. Stuck it in a drawer, and there it sat for years until the World Trade Center was attacked. And then it came to me how I could help those families, those officers who were killed. It was the deadliest day in law enforcement history. And I said to myself, every cop I know has a story like this. I'm going to ask them to write those stories. I'm going to put them in a book, and I'm going to give every penny of the royalties to their families. That's exactly what happened.
Oh, that's cool.
And that was called True Blue Police Stories by those who have lived them. Now, like I said, I didn't intend to be a writer. The editor-in-chief at St. Martin's Press liked my story about her, Jackie. Her name, the story's called Her Name Was Jackie, and all the other parts and of the book that I wrote, and brought me into his office in St. Martin's Press and said, I would like you to write your own book about your own stories. And that was my second book called A Cop's Life, which is still selling pretty good today. So everything that's happened in my life happened in spite of me, not because of me, right? So that book, and then I did a third book called, it was the second in the series, True Blue, and I donated most of the royalties to the Memorial Foundation that helps memorialize the lives of cops who were killed in the line of duty. And then years later was when I had the stroke, and I'm questioning as to what the next pathway is for Randy. And while I knew it was going to be a book, but I didn't know what it was going to be about. And then one day I'm sitting watching a news interview, and the guy being interviewed is named Frank Shankwitz. And Frank is, you don't know the name that well because he was so understated, but he was the man who created the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And what people don't know is that he created the Make-A-Wish Foundation when he was an Arizona trooper. And his story, I was sitting there listening. He was telling the story about how he created Make-A-Wish. And I was mesmerized. I was sitting there like this, and it was like somebody turned on the light bulb. And I said to myself, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk to people like Frank Shankwitz about who it was in their life that caused them to leave such an incredible legacy. And that became the book, The Power of Legacy. So the first person I reached out to was Frank Shankwitz. And because we shared the common history of being a cop, now get this, he created Make-A-Wish, right? He started it, he ran it, he began it, but he still was a cop for 40 years.
Oh, no kidding.
For 40 years.
I don't know this story. I should know this story about it.
You got to watch the movie Wishman.
Yeah.
Wishman.
Yeah. And
I was lucky enough
book.
to know Frank too, and Frank was the consummate gentleman. So
Yes.
understated,
yes,
so humble, an incredible storyteller.
the
best storyteller. So Frank was one of those people for you.
Frank and I met. There's all kinds of weirdnesses that took place here, right?
Coincidences that were not coincidences.
right.
Yeah.
I can see now why you say create your legacy, because you can't create necessarily your
You can't
destiny.
choose your destiny, right?
Yeah,
Right.
starting to all make sense to me now.
Mhm.
Because you've got all these things that happened to you, and you created legacy out of those experiences.
Yes.
None of which you were expecting.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Exactly. So I go to sit with Frank Shankwitz. Now, when I had made the appointment with him, he lived in
Prescott, Arizona.
Prescott, Arizona, and of course that's not a bad drive from Vegas, right? So I was going to meet him at his house, and then the day before, he says, "Look, I'm going to save you an hour. Meet me in Seligman, Arizona." Now I'm going, "Sure, okay," and he tells me the place, this diner to meet him at, and I hang up and I go, "Where the hell is Seligman, Arizona?" And I look it up, and it's a little town on Old Route 66. What I didn't know at the time was that's where Frank's story began, in Seligman, Arizona. That was later to become a very major part of who he was and the story. My parents, years and years ago, had taken a road trip on Old Route 66. My father kind of fancied himself to be a photographer, right? He really wasn't, but he thought he was, right? But every day of my life, I walked by a photograph of a picture that he had taken on, I didn't know it at the time, on Old Route 66, 3 storefronts. And I literally walked by this picture every day of my life for 20 years, right? So I get to Seligman, Arizona, on Old Route 66. And you guys are too young to know this, but there was a television show called Route 66. And it was about, and exactly what we're talking about, two guys who were basically modern day knights errant in an old Corvette on the road to adventure, stopping in every little town and doing good deeds.
Oh,
it's one of the most amazing. This television series was so far ahead of its time. It was in the early 60s. Well, I fell in love with it even though I was a kid. And I've been driving Corvettes ever since because of that freaking series.
That's awesome.
Right? So I pull into Seligman, Arizona, park in the parking lot. And I've got my Corvette and the top is down. It's a beautiful autumn day. And I get out of the car, and I'm not making this up. I get out of the car and I stretch and I look across the street. It's the photograph. I was standing right where my father stood 50 years before. Tell me that's not a sign.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then I walk in and meet Frank Shankwitz. And I got to tell you, seeing that photograph and feeling the impact that it had was emotional. So I walk in. Frank is sitting there with his customary black cowboy hat on that he wore all the time. And that became a lifelong friendship. He gave me this amazing story, which is the first story in my book, The Power of Legacy. He became my mentor. I told him, that I was, at that point, it was just a vision, the charity.
Right.
And later I asked him to help me, and he came right on board, and he was part of the organization till his dying day. So this is, it's The Power of Legacy was a life-changing book for me to write because I got to interact with Frank Shankwitz, some of the most incredible people. Gary Sinise was part of the book. But a lot of people whose names you wouldn't know, but whose deeds they have touched the lives of millions of people.
Yeah, they're household causes, not household names.
Right.
That's what I love.
That's
what I love about it because nobody knew Frank, but everybody knows the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Mm-hmm. That is cool. Actually, I'm glad you pointed that out.
Like what we do doesn't have to be about us. It needs to be about what we do and what gets left behind.
Yes.
Frank was a perfect example of that. And someday the Wounded Blue will be a household name that takes care of people. And Randy Sutton might not be associated with that name, but what you leave behind will.
Exactly. You know what? When I'm a success will be when the Wounded Blue doesn't have to even exist.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. You're trying to work yourself out of a job.
Yeah, exactly. So these pathways that become open to us, like I thought that, when I had the stroke, my life was over, basically. Life as I knew it was over. Little did I know that was going to open a door which would create the incredible people that I have met along this journey. And, we found today, for the listening audience, that Cory and I have never met before, but it turns out that we are insanely connected through the friendship of a guy that has been so instrumental in helping the Wounded Blue. It turns out that they too are close friends, and it was just so bizarre. But it is indicative of how the circle of life, the way it laws of attraction and the circle of life can play a deep, meaningful role in the lives of all of us.
Yeah, my partner in Las Vegas is really good friends. So that's a small world. In fact, I don't think he would care if we said Frank Martin, guy's dad, was on the podcast, actually. So listeners who listen every week, you've heard from Frank, and we're all close friends, and we didn't even know it.
It's amazing. It really
we found out literally, how long has the podcast been going? 40 minutes ago.
Yeah, and incredible that when I was in Vegas, you were in Vegas, Cory was actually in Vegas as well, like all at the same time. We haven't seen each other for 6 years. I followed what Randy's been doing online because I was always impressed by his story and his passion and that legacy of leaving behind, because it was the early days of the Gentleman Project that I met you. And I was down at Lake Las Vegas, and I was there for the Gentleman Project. I was there networking for the Gentleman Project, trying to find people that could help us advance the cause of the Gentleman Project. And I met you, and here you are.
It's
like
a,
6
it's a
years
very
later
strange pathway.
on the podcast.
Cool.
So there are no coincidences.
Amen.
And it's neat to be able to recognize those. Like, you can say that all you want, but if we open our eyes and we actually look at what's been put in our way and put in our place, those opportunities, and I go back to the podcast that was actually Bryce Blanchard, when one of his daughters' first answers to the question of what have I taught you is be willing to cut. Be willing to see opportunities in front of you when the pressure is on, to see those things that will change your life. Yeah. And most people are so blinded by what's right in front of them, they can't see the opportunity that surrounds them.
But, you know, it's interesting you say that, because one of the valuable lessons I learned when I was, writing the book, The Power of Legacy, virtually every one of those people that created either a foundation like Make-A-Wish, or touched lives in meaningful ways. Almost every one of those people rose from a position of pain that they personally experienced, that gave birth to the idea, that gave birth to the mission, and so the pain from it can grow like a phoenix and become an empowering force. And that was probably the most valuable lesson I learned from doing The Power of Legacy, and why it was such a life changer for me.
Yeah, most people's stories and most people's affecting change come from a place where they felt pain, or they had to make major changes, or right. So I was thinking that when you actually first started your story, maybe even before we started the podcast, of you had the stroke and you were treated unfairly, to put it lightly. But that also gave birth to what you're doing.
Yes.
And it was meant to be, it seems.
Yes.
That Wounded Blue wouldn't exist.
That's correct.
Have that not happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So, Randy, we're getting close. So talk to us about, we always ask the same question, right? Talk to us about what it means to you to be a gentleman.
I love that question, because to me, being a gentleman means being a person of deep belief in the good of the world, and being dedicated to a life of honor and integrity and service. Those are big words. And in order to be a gentleman, that is quintessential in creating what is inside of you to become a gentleman. Now, there's more to it. I remember my dad. My dad was not a sage old man, but he did come up with some good ones. And he taught me about being a gentleman. He told me several things. And one of them was the way you treat people is what creates you being a gentleman. The way you treat women was one of the topics that he ingrained in me. Chivalry. I love that word.
It's a good word.
It's a great word. And chivalry is something that I believe is inherent in being a gentleman. It's opening a door for a lady. It's doing something that makes people feel special. And that to me, these are all ingrained in what it means to be a gentleman. So I thank you for asking that question, because it's one that should be in your own mind and thought about, because you define it yourself for yourself. So it's a great question.
I honestly think that I could talk to Randy and we could make this podcast like 3-4 hours long, and I would not be bored. Believe it or not, if you're listening to the podcast, it has been 45 minutes. And we try to respect your time so that when you commit to our podcast, you know what you're committing to. Randy, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of people that are listening to the podcast that want to stay connected to you. You're very active on Facebook.
Yes.
And if you want to know what Randy's doing, every single current event that impacts law enforcement, their lives, policy, lawmaking, everything Randy's on top of. He's always on Fox News talking about the things that impact this community. So now that you know who Randy Sutton is, you'll see Randy Sutton all over the place. And if you want to connect with him, especially if you are in the law enforcement community and can use the resources that his organization provides, reach out to Randy. Thank you for spending your time with us today, Randy. It's been an honor to be with you in person.
It's been my pleasure.
To reconnect with you and see that our paths have crossed for a purpose again.
I appreciate the opportunity, and anybody out there that wants to know more can go to our website, thewoundedblue.org, thewoundedblue.org. And if you want to connect with me personally and you want to help our cause, Randy at thewoundedblue.org.
Yeah, you're looking for sponsors because one of the main things that is a challenge in any charity is that you need to raise money so that you can do good with the money.
Yes.
And tell them real short what you just did for Christmas for some of your law enforcement families. This is what your money goes towards if you support the Wounded Blue.
That's right. We made Christmas happen for 10 families of injured and disabled law enforcement officers. People, because they're really, really struggling financially when they lose their jobs or they're out on leave because of their injuries. And we gave each family, 10 families, $1,000 apiece, $10,000 total, to put a smile on their face for Christmas. And I got to tell you, it put smiles on all of our faces to be able to do it.
It's very cool.
In fact, we'll be putting some videos about this on the Wounded Blue Facebook page. So I urge anybody that's listening, and you're on Facebook, go to the Wounded Blue, follow us over there, and you'll see some amazing stuff.
Well, thanks for being the person you are and doing the things you're doing and making a difference, creating a legacy. We appreciate you being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Randy. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Thanks for joining us. Remember to make a legacy for yourself. Thanks, everyone.